Welcome to Maritime Pakistan, your gateway to the fascinating world of oceans and the opportunities they present to every one of us. Today's video explains the Torremolinos International Convention for the Safety of Fishing Vessels, 1977. When standard cargo ships prepare for a voyage, they load their freight while docked safely in a calm port. By the time they set sail, their cargo holds are full, and their center of gravity is entirely stable. Fishing vessels operate in reverse. They sail out empty, navigating into deep, volatile waters before taking on heavy hauls of fish dynamically out on the open sea. That process creates intense physical instability. The weight distribution changes constantly as massive, heavy nets are hauled aboard, and the crew members themselves must shift around a wet, pitching deck to sort and process the catch. Because of these extreme differences in how the ships load and balance in open water, standard maritime safety regulations written for stable cargo freighters provide almost no practical protection for fishing crews. This lack of protection affects a massive global workforce. Modern industrial fishing relies on massive, highly mechanized ships that operate across the world's oceans, often staying at sea for months at a time. Yet, prior to 1977, there was a complete legal vacuum. No dedicated international safety convention existed specifically for the crews operating these unique vessels. As a result, fleets from different nations operated under entirely separate rules. There were no universally enforced standards dictating how fishing vessels should be constructed or what emergency equipment they were required to carry. Leaving hundreds of thousands of seafarers in this legal blind spot resulted in highly dangerous working conditions, forcing maritime authorities to engineer a bespoke legal framework to address the specific physics of commercial fishing. The first major attempt to fill that gap came in 1977, when the International Maritime Organization introduced the Torremolinos Convention, setting specific safety standards for newly built, decked fishing vessels measuring 24 meters and over. The convention focused heavily on hardware. It laid out strict requirements for the physical construction of the hull and the mandatory emergency equipment required on board these large vessels. But an immediate problem emerged. By the 1980s, it became obvious that fishing vessels varied drastically in design from one country to another. The new rules were too rigid, making it nearly impossible for many global fleets to comply, and implementation stalled. To salvage the effort, the IMO drafted the 1993 Torremolinos Protocol, a revised agreement explicitly designed to update, amend, and absorb the failed 1977 parent convention. However, even the 1993 update demanded highly specific technical upgrades that many nations could not afford or enforce. Without enough countries willing to ratify the protocol, it failed to take effect, leaving fishers without unified international protection for another 20 years. The breakthrough finally arrived during a 2012 diplomatic conference in Cape Town, South Africa, where regulators abandoned rigid ultimatums in favor of a flexible approach. This timeline highlights the core innovation: progressive implementation. Administrations were granted up to 10 years to phase in expensive upgrades like radiocommunication systems. A secondary 5-year phase-in period covers essential life-saving appliances, emergency drills, and navigational equipment. This map illustrates another critical compromise: the Smart Exemptions Clause. It shows how countries can exempt vessels from certain requirements if those ships operate strictly within an exclusive economic zone, extending up to 200 nautical miles from the coast, avoiding general high seas navigational hazards. By engineering a treaty that bent rather than broke, offering realistic timelines and regional exemptions, the IMO created a workable legal framework that maritime nations could realistically sign and enforce. To ensure the treaty actually went into effect, the conference adopted 6 specific resolutions, designed as an active plan to push countries toward implementation. Resolution 2 formally addressed the legal mess of the past, explicitly stating that the Cape Town Agreement replaces and supersedes the failed 1993 protocol, preventing a situation where 2 conflicting international maritime laws exist at the same time. Resolution 3 recognized the immense financial burden of upgrading thousands of ships. It mandates that the IMO and wealthier nations provide technical assistance and cooperation to developing states that might struggle to meet the requirements. That cooperation yields tangible results, allowing older vessels to be properly retrofitted with the mandated modern navigational arrangements and advanced shipborne technology required to keep the crew safe. Taken together, these resolutions mark a shift in strategy. Instead of simply writing laws and waiting for compliance, regulators actively built the global support system necessary to make those laws a reality. This data visualization shows the threshold required for the Cape Town Agreement to enter into force. One bar tracks toward a minimum of 22 states, while the other tracks an aggregate of 3,600 fishing vessels. Hitting that numerical threshold triggers universal, binding access to standard life-saving appliances for seafarers working in the world's most physically dangerous maritime sector. And while the Torremolinos framework focuses strictly on large industrial ships, the IMO is also collaborating with the FAO and ILO on voluntary safety codes and design guidelines to protect seafarers on smaller, traditional fishing boats. We hope you liked today's video. Post your questions in the comments for future videos. Achieving international maritime safety requires immense patience. After 35 years of technical hurdles and legal false starts, the Cape Town Agreement represents the final, pragmatic mechanism needed to protect the seafarers who help feed the world.